what we wanted was, we were very clear, we wanted to have another child. I very much wanted to make sure that my son had a sibling. But my husband made it very clear, trying to have another child would not be worth it if it put my life at risk.
Hi, Michelle Florendo here, and welcome to Ask a Decision Engineer. Listen in and find out how to untangle big decisions with less stress and more clarity. Today's episode is going to be an Ask Me Anything episode, where I answer questions sent by you, the listeners, about decision making. I'd love to hear what you're wondering about decision making. So if you have a question you'd like me to answer on the show, head over to askadecisionengineer.com and leave me a message.
Hi.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Michelle.
This is Christopher from New York.
This is Hannah from Melbourne, Australia.
My name is Tomas, and I live in Dublin, in Ireland.
I'm Aga from Warsaw, Poland.
And my question for you is...
My question is...
I am wondering...
I'd really love to know...
I have a question for you.
Hi, Michelle. I'm Janice from Grand Rapids. I love how you bring guests on to talk through their decisions. But can you share more about how you've used what you teach in a decision in your own life? Thanks.
Hi, Janice. Thank you for that question. I actually do apply quite a bit of what I teach to various decisions that I face in my everyday life as a professional, as a leader, as a business owner, as a mom, as a daughter. And I will share about a particular big decision where these tools really supported me. And because it was a particularly big decision, I brought my friend Shanice on the show again to help me talk about it.
Hey, so Michelle, I am so happy to sit down and talk with you today because I actually spent some time over the last week listening to all of your past podcasts to really start to think about, like, what does decision making look like in my life? I really am struggling with some big decisions, and your podcast has been really helpful. Can you share a little bit about how you apply some of the frameworks that you've been teaching in your podcast over the last few years into your own personal life? And if you're filling up for it, can you share like a specific example of how you use any one of these frameworks in your own journey?
Yeah. It's funny you ask how I use these frameworks because I'm going through this year, we as a family have been going through some big decisions, and because those are still pending, I won't share those today. Okay. But I will share another big decision that really affected our family that happened actually maybe about a year before this podcast even started. For people who are listening to this, if you've listened to the first episode, you may know that back in 2017, I had a pretty major health crisis. And what was uncovered was that I had a condition that was chronic. And at the time, the best known treatment for it was surgery. And it was likely going to be a recurring needed surgery. But one of the things that was a bit of a complication was that we, as a family, I had one kid at the time, and we wanted to have another kid. And I remember distinctly the second time I had to go in for surgery, I asked the anesthesiologist, "Oh, can I have this surgery if I'm, pregnant with another child?" And I distinctly remember him laughing. And I was like, "Is that a no?" And he's like, "No, like this is not a surgery that we can perform on a pregnant person." So that provided a little wrinkle into our family plans. Partially because on one hand, we wanted to try. I know there's no way of guaranteeing the age difference between kids, but we wanted to try for a particular age difference. We wanted to try for about 3 years, and we were coming up on the time to start trying. But we had this health wrinkle around like, well, given that I have this condition that needs treatment and we're not exactly sure when I might need it or how it's progressing, and it is something that would be basically contraindicated with pregnancy. Do we try? Should we try? When would we try?
Yeah.
Is that safe? So that was a big decision we needed to make, and that pretty much required me to think, how is it that I would support someone else if they were going through a decision like this?
Yeah. So when you say we, like who was included in that decision? Was your doctor a part of it? Your husband, your family, your other child? Like who was a part of the we in making this?
Yeah, so it was a conversation that I was having with my husband, and yes, also my doctor. And so I think when I think about the three components of every decision, right? Our objectives, our options, and our information. Or now I'm kind of playing with a slightly different take on explaining things like want, ways, and wisdom.
Mm.
Like what we wanted was we were very clear we wanted to have another child. I grew up with a sibling. My husband was an only child. I very much wanted to make sure that my son had a sibling. So that's something that we wanted. But my husband made it very clear trying to have another child would not be worth it if it put my life at risk.
Yeah.
Like he was not willing to have another child at the expense of losing his life partner and the mother of our existing child. Right. He was 18 months at the time. He did not have a say, but we were just thinking, okay, I need to be around. And then, yes, the doctor started being part of the conversation, not necessarily in dictating what to do. And I think that's also an interesting thing. When we think about group decision making, sometimes what I see happen in conversations is people are expressing or they go straight to like, what should you choose? And I think what's something that was really intentional about how we approached this process was, again, looking at the process itself, the components of things. So the doctor did not weigh in on what to do in the end, but she was very instrumental in exploring what are our options.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so having three people in this decision, like how do you take into considerations other people's opinions and interests in your life over or in collaboration with your needs and your wants? So how do you weigh the different opinions of your doctor, of your husband, and then your own voice inside your head to help you really begin to arrive at that decision?
Yeah. I mean, the doctor is just someone who could inform us in terms of the options if we were to go down this path and we found that my condition was progressing and it would need treatment. What are the options we would have at that point in time, knowing that we still wanted to try to have another child and we wanted to safeguard my safety. My safety was like number one.
Yeah.
But again, like she would not be able to weigh in on like what level of risk we were comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And so she could give us a sense of eventually what I did was I mapped out an entire decision tree. It's like,
Okay.
oh, okay, because basically what happened was there were some treatments that she suggested we could do to try to slow or prevent the progression of my condition on the front end. Treatments
Mm-hmm.
that were not necessarily advised if I were pregnant. So it was kind of like, okay, let's like hold off on trying so that I could go through a few rounds of treatment. And then she said, okay, and then maybe that'll buy you a particular window to try. And then there would be a split. Okay, if we were able to become pregnant, because again,
Try.
try. So many uncertainties. If I were able to get pregnant, then we would wait and see how things would progress. If I didn't, then maybe I'd go back into another round of treatment. We'd hold off on trying. And then so I built out this entire decision tree. And I think eventually what happened was we would play out. So for those of you who are listening, a decision tree is basically a visual representation of the different decisions you might make over time and then the outcomes that might play out over time. And then, given a particular outcome like, oh, I got pregnant, or oh, my condition was progressing, then there might be new decisions to be made. And what happened was as we were playing out, okay, if we tried and I got pregnant, and then if I got pregnant and my condition was progressing, what treatment options could we pursue? Which ones could we not? And then in one of the branches of the trees, there was a scenario where, like, if I were far into my pregnancy, our sense is that, in the medical world, they're always trying to preserve life. So like healthy mom, a healthy baby. Another thing that I know is that the maternal mortality rate for women of color is higher than it is for white women, and also is higher in this particular industrialized country, the US, than any other industrialized country.
Mm-hmm.
And side note, I still remember when my son was a few months old, we attended the funeral of one of my college classmates who passed away in childbirth. And so there was very real risk
Yeah.
that we were weighing here.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, my husband said, if this is going to come down to a choice of a doctor deciding who to save, my wife or an unborn child, I am not in for trying,
Mm.
period.
Mm-hmm.
Like if
How
I
did
don't
that
get, if
affect
we don't,
you? Yeah, but I'm curious, like knowing that he was very clear on his decision, how did that
yeah,
affect you and yours?
I mean, he made a good point.
Mm-hmm.
I think something that I've realized can really weigh on one's emotions is, I mean, even in that health crisis in 2017, I was the one who was going through it, but also because of, and I think I talked about it in the first episode, because of the way that I framed the experience and the way that I was going through it, and also my faith in God, I didn't feel as bothered by that health crisis as much as my husband was,
Mm-hmm.
him having to witness that. Like I realized that, yeah, if there were going to be any chance where he could not exercise the choice or like, some sort of safety net to make sure that I could be safe, he would not be comfortable stepping into that set of possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because it actually, now that I'm talking about it out loud, it reminds me of one of the episodes from the podcast where I brought in my friend Alexis Gonzalez Black from August Public. It's a organizational design firm. And she talks about decision making, like multi-party decision making all the time, albeit in the corporate world. And one of the things she talks about is the difference between, is it right to safe to try?
Mm-hmm.
And approaching sometimes we may not be able to arrive at a unanimous decision of, is this the right thing? But we can get there more easily if we're focusing on safe to try. And I realized that was something that my husband was holding very close to his heart. Like, is this actually safe to try?
Yeah.
And I realized that now in retrospect, at that point in time, a woman's right to choose, a woman's right to an abortion was still a guaranteed right, but unfortunately was reversed by the Supreme Court afterwards.
Yeah.
And so I remember telling him, I was just like, at the end of the day, we live in a place where if the decision was we need to terminate this pregnancy in order to save my life, we can do that.
Yeah.
And that's what made it safe to try.
Mm-hmm.
So I find it really interesting that the right to choose and make these medical decisions is the reason why we're able to expand our family.
Yeah. Living in a true democracy where we are in control of our own bodies.
Health decisions.
Yeah, which is crazy that it's been reversed and extremely unfortunate because you wouldn't even have had that choice given if the regulations were different
Right.
during that time. So it sounds like there was a lot of risk in what you were choosing, although there were some precautions that you could take if it did get as bad as it possibly could. So how did you, like, you talked about God and you talked about like your faith. So like, what are some other things that someone could consider when it comes to weighing the risk if it's not a guarantee that it's going to be safe or good or whatever the outcome's going to be of your decision?
Yeah. One of the things that came out of that exercise and just seeing how creating a decision tree really helped me evaluate the possibilities, the possible scenarios, both the upsides and the downsides. It made me think about, okay, how is it that I could teach this process to someone else? And that's where I developed what I call right now the relief regret matrix.
Okay.
And so being able to think about, okay, what are the situations and scenarios in the future where I feel like happy or relieved or thrilled that I made a decision, like the decision to try. And also, what are the scenarios where we might regret or be deeply remorseful of the fact that we made a particular decision? And my husband identified that particular scenario. And then there's a couple questions that follow after that. And so one is when you're thinking about whatever the regretful scenario may be, one, how likely is that? And so that's where the doctor was able to come in. And there was still a lot of uncertainty about the nature of my condition and how quickly it would progress because we had just discovered it in me. But at least like based on her research, she was able to provide some of the likelihoods. And then also asking the question, well, you know, if that regretful situation were to come to pass, what would we do? How would we respond? And I think that's where we made it clear, like if it came down to it, if we had to choose the life, it would be mine. Being real about like, okay, if we were to embark in like a regretful situation, what can be done? So remembering, you know, sometimes we get stuck in the fear of like bad things happening and we forget that there are things we can do to respond in those scenarios. And then rewinding back to the present, are there things that we can do now in order to mitigate that risk? And so risk has two components. There's the magnitude, which is the how big is the badness?
Yeah.
And then there's the likelihood. And that's where we mapped out the if this, then that, you know, what are things that we could do now to minimize the likelihood of us getting to such a critical scenario.
So it sounds like the decision tree was extremely helpful in making this decision. And you also had a trained doctor that was available to give you some of the information that you might have been missing otherwise. So I'm curious, like, how would one gather maybe some of the missing information that they might not know of on the tree? Like, what if there's scenarios on the tree that they just don't have data or information to even begin to weigh the option? What are some alternative ways that you can gather information, gather data as you are making these decisions?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's where talking to other people can be useful, right? Whenever I've faced these types of decisions where there are unknowns or uncertainties or ones where there may be risk, I'll tap into that social way of knowing, right? And again, when I'm asking people, I'm not asking them for what they would do, but I am asking them to help inform me of, okay, yeah, like what are the possibilities when it comes to options? What are the different ways we might explore getting the things that we ultimately want? What else might we consider and what biases might they see in us as we are facing particular situations? Again, having them weigh in on bits of the process versus what we should do in the end.
Yeah.
And
So
then having all of our, you know, all of these thoughts and feelings on paper, literally somewhere, so that it's easier for us to track and have conversations around.
Yeah. And I imagine the tree is also helpful for just showing you where you need that additional information, and it can point you in the right direction to who you should be talking to and the other opinions or knowledge or connections that you want to support you in your decision. So I imagine like sitting down and doing one of these trees, you might not be able to have all the answers, but it really just points you in the direction of where you start collecting data and information to support you along making that decision. Yeah, that's awesome. I want to start using that tree. Like, I need to see this tree. And so, like, what advice might you give someone who might be in a similar situation or navigating potentially a big decision that has a lot of risk? I mean, your life or the life of your baby is, in my opinion, one of the ultimate risk. So what advice might you have for someone who is navigating something similar or just something that has a lot of risk connected to the decision?
Yeah. Well, one, what is at risk, right? And so I think sometimes, and I forget if I've talked about this in a different episode, sometimes we come in with assumptions that we all agree on what the objectives are. And so sometimes there are assumptions around like, oh, if we say something is risky, oh, it may be like financially risky, physically risky. There are some sorts of risk that people collectively just kind of assume, oh, that's what we're talking about. But risk is all about the possibility of not meeting your objectives. And so objectives is where it starts. Like, yes, there's something physically risky here, but also what was at risk was our ability to have the expanded family that we wanted.
Yeah.
So that was another thing to weigh. So I think number one, being clear about what your objectives are so that you can be clear about what is at risk. I think second, exploring what is the upside and the downside in these uncertain situations, depending on personality. I have a personality that tends to skew towards seeing the downsides versus like recognizing upsides. And so
Yeah.
it's just useful again, like, and this is where I'll probably in another episode talk about the relief regret matrix in more detail, like being able to think about the upside and also the downside in a balanced way. Because sometimes depending on personality, we may have a bias one
Yeah.
way or
Yeah.
another. And really like examining what is at risk in those terms of, magnitude. So I mean, I know I say how big is the badness, but also like, how, to what degree are we able to meet our objectives or not? That's really what magnitude is, and then likelihood. Because sometimes we may have biases around whether we inflate the likelihood of upside or downside. And so that, especially when making decisions with more than one person, you might have different risk profiles. It's just useful to be able to talk about those things. And then I think refocusing on where your agency is. So yes, in the face of risk and uncertainty, there are going to be things that we cannot control. But what are the things that we can? So again, if we were to get to like a close to regretful situation, what are the ways in which we could respond? What are the things that we could do ahead of time to mitigate risk? Because I think it's in the identifying where we still have agency that we can build more resilience and confidence in order to move forward with whatever decision we end up choosing.
Yeah. And with that, can you share how did it end up? Is there another baby here? Like what was the outcome of the decision that you made to move forward?
Yeah, I mean, I always have mixed feelings about sharing the outcomes of decisions because I think there can be a tendency for resulting, which is conflating the quality of a decision with the quality of the outcome. So I will name, we did arrive at a good outcome, which was I ended up, I mean, when I was baking up the pilot season of this podcast, I was pregnant with my second child. And in the end, she was born healthy. My chronic condition didn't present any complications with the pregnancy or the birth, although there were other medical complications associated with that birth. And so after that, we decided not to try to have any additional kids. But I think even, again, the quality of a decision is not necessarily equal to the quality of the outcome. And so even before all those things happened, even before we were able to get pregnant, even before I was able to carry that pregnancy to term, at the point that we made the decision, we felt good about it because of the process we went through. And I think that's what matters.
Well, thank you so much. I wouldn't have even thought about it in that way. Like ultimately, I always think like, what did you choose and what was the outcome? But thinking about it in terms of a process and making the best choice you have with the data that you currently have at your hands right there, and really just practicing your agency over what you have control over and not worrying so much whether it's a good outcome or a bad outcome, but trusting yourself, trusting the process, using these tools, using these frameworks, and really help you arrive at a place that regardless of what the outcome is, you can handle what's next. So thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom and insights and giving a very specific and really vulnerable example of how you have used these frameworks in your life. And I really hope that someone else can listen to your story and really begin to apply these tools. And is there any way that we can like get an example or find this decision tree somewhere? Like how can we engage in a decision tree?
Yeah. So one of the things that I found is that it's challenging to teach people how to use decision trees in the compact amount of time that I'm usually running workshops or in the context of a single coaching session. And so I did develop an alternative to that analysis called the relief regret matrix. One thing I will say though is if you're listening to this and you're facing a decision on a deadline, I do talk about the relief regret matrix and that analysis along with a whole suite of other tools and frameworks in my decision toolkit for personal decisions self-paced course online. As I was doing this episode, I realized that the relief regret matrix is a tool that I haven't actually talked about that much publicly. So be sure to stay tuned for next week's episode, where I'll be expanding on what is this relief regret matrix, how is it that you set it up, and how is it that you can use it in decisions where the future is uncertain or may even carry risks. Stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you know of someone who might benefit from learning more about how to make good decisions, please send them a link to our website, askadecisionengineer.com. The website, askadecisionengineer.com, is also the place to go if you're interested in more resources on decision making or would like to submit a question to potentially be answered on a future episode. Again, this is Michelle Florendo from Ask a Decision Engineer. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.